Hey everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a college coach conversation. And before we get to our next segment, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We love getting reviews on our podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have an opportunity to leave us a review, we would love to see those reviews, especially the ones that are 5 stars. 5-star reviews are great. You can talk about your favorite host on the show, even if it's Sally or Beth and not me. It's not like we go through those reviews and actually compare notes and see who the favorite host is. But if you have a chance to go ahead and leave us a review, we very much appreciate it. It helps more people to find this podcast, which ultimately means that there is more good information about college admission out there. And so you don't have to go and convince your neighbor that what she read on College Confidential isn't actually true. Now, speaking of topics that often come to College Confidential, we're going to talk about what happens when you are deferred. So you can apply early decision or early action to schools. And one of the more common outcomes, I think, which students are not necessarily expecting, is a deferral. And to help us talk through that deferral for today is my colleague in Nevada, Joy Biscornet. Hey, Joy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ian, it's good to be here today.
Glad to have you here. We're going to do some myth busting so that the people don't go to College Confidential. Are you okay with that?
I'm totally okay with that. In fact, when I was gathering my thoughts for this conversation, College Confidential popped into my mind, and I thought, I don't want students going there. So let's bust some myths.
Bust some myths. Here we're going to bust some myths. Okay, so a deferral, right? Let's just there are basic options. A lot of students think that if you apply early to a school, there are two outcomes: you get in or you don't. And that's true, but the you don't get in actually has two different possibilities. You want to talk through those for the family, just as providing a definition?
Sure. So when a student applies early, there are those two main decisions: either you get in or you don't get in. But within the you don't get in, there's sort of this subcategory that you could be denied, and that's the final decision, or you could actually be deferred. And what this means is that the admission committee reviewed your application, and while they determined that you weren't competitive for admission in the early round, they want to be able to reevaluate your application within the context of the larger applicant pool.
Yeah.
So they're not ready to make that final decision. So they roll your application over into the larger regular decision pool with that decision of defer. They're deferring the decision, and then they'll make that decision when they're making all of the other regular decisions.
Right.
That decision will come out somewhere between mid-March and April 1 for the most part.
It reminds me of, I don't know if it was like an old bar game or just a parlor game, but there was a computer and it would show you a picture of something. It would just show you a little detail, and then it would add a little bit more of the picture and a little bit more of the picture. And you'd have to identify what the picture was as early as possible. And basically what these schools are saying is that we don't have enough of the picture. We need more time. And that might mean that they need more information from you specifically, which could be your fall grades. It could be more information about an extracurricular activity that needs to play itself out, like a competition. Or it might mean that they need more information about the larger pool. They need to just see how strong the overall applicant pool is to see how you fit within it.
Right.
Now, I want to talk just briefly about how students should feel about being deferred. I think sometimes a deferral can be good news. Sometimes a deferral can be no news at all, depending on the schools that we're talking about. So for a student who gets deferred, they're obviously going to be disappointed. It's not getting in. But where should a student sort of be optimistic or continue to be hopeful? And where should a student sort of say, deferral doesn't really give me any more information than I would otherwise have here?
Mm-hmm. So for some schools, particularly I would say large public universities, getting deferred could be, I'll say it's not a bad thing necessarily, because for many of those schools, they want to see if you're really interested, if you will, because for many public institutions, they're receiving applications from students that are in-state residents. They might be seeing students from out of state. Regardless, they might be seeing students who look really strong in their applicant pools, and they might be thinking, well, maybe the student is applying elsewhere,
Yeah.
and might not be a top choice.
Yeah.
So they're actually deferring the applicant to get a sense of how realistic or how true this application really is.
Right.
So, and for many of those schools, they'll take a pretty good portion of those students that they deferred in the regular decision process.
That's right. And what it comes down to is that colleges don't want to admit a lot of students that are not ultimately going to take them up on the offer, because it will artificially inflate their admit rates and it'll make their yield rate go down. And so when you're looking at measures of quality, and then, I wish it didn't have to be this way, but when we're talking about institutional quality, the larger percentage of students you admit, the more people say, well, that's not as good a school. So enrollment managers will often make choices that will allow them to keep that admit rate low. And for some schools like the ones Joy's describing, that might mean that really talented students that might not be serious about a school are getting deferred rather than being admitted through this early action option.
Right. Now, there are other times where, or to piggyback off of your point, the more selective the school is, the less likely they may be to take students from that deferred pool. So it's not a final decision, but I think it's a great time if you're deferred to reevaluate your list and see, is it balanced? Because if this defer does not lead to an eventual admit, then you need to make sure that you have other options, realistic options, for your regular decision applications.
Right. And if you're working with College Coach or you're listening to your college counselor, you hopefully had planned for this many months in advance before hearing back from the schools. But there can be opportunities where you were really hoping about that early decision offer. You were waiting a little bit to apply to some other schools. And so that deferral might change how you're thinking about your process, right? So if you get deferred at, well, let's pick a fairly selective school that is, still pretty good. Let's say Northwestern defers you, okay? Probably in regular decision, you don't want to be adding Ivy League schools to your application list, because if you've been deferred by Northwestern, you're probably not going to be competitive for Harvard, Yale, Princeton. That's not in all possible worlds, but I think that in the vast majority of cases, we would say that students that would be deferred at Northwestern are not going to be competitive for admission to schools that are more selective. And so you could change your approach in that way.
Right. And if you've noticed for some reason your list is a little top heavy and that deferral from Northwestern kind of has maybe caught you a bit off guard, then there is still time to reevaluate your list and maybe add one or two no problem or maybe just right schools where especially you know that you're in the top percentage of their applicant pool.
That's right. Now, there are cases where you get a defer from a school and maybe it doesn't surprise you. So you applied early decision to Northwestern, let's say, and you know that that's going to be the toughest school for you to get into from all the schools on your list, and you get deferred. And that's something that you were probably expecting or bracing for. You don't have to assume that because of that, now all of your no problem and your just right schools are less likely to be interested in you. Right. So understand how this early school kind of fits within the landscape of your entire list. Don't take every deferred decision as an indication that there is something wrong with your application. It could just be that it has something to do with the applicant pool or that particular school's way of approaching admission for that year.
Right. This is not a time to panic and say, well, I got deferred from this school, so I'm not getting in anywhere now.
Right.
That's not the place where your mind should go. Take this as one decision in your process. Let yourself sit with it and then move forward, because there are things that you can still do for regular decision to show your interest and to strengthen your application potentially for when it's reevaluated in the context of the larger pool.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. But before I do that, for any students who are listening to this who are juniors right now, I know we've got a lot of senior listeners who might be working on their essays or they're waiting for these decisions to come back. Juniors and parents of juniors, you might be looking ahead to next year. And one thing that I just want to throw in here is that I've seen students who will scramble to try and get just that early decision application in or just an early action application to a top choice, and will forego the opportunity to apply early action to some schools that might be target schools or safety schools for them, because they say, well, those schools aren't as important to me. I'm going to go ahead and apply regular decision and not worry about the early action deadlines. And I think that when you are in the middle of December and you have no information and you hear back only from one or two of the most selective schools on your list that you've been deferred, boy, it would be really nice if a couple of other schools had offered you admission from that early action round, just so you've got a couple of schools that you can count on later on in the spring. So as you're planning out your lists and thinking about this approach, apply to schools that offer early action if at all possible. And if you're a junior, you've got 11 months to get your act in gear so that you can do that. So there's no excuses. I think make sure that if you can do early action at a variety of schools, try and go ahead and do that.
And I'm a huge fan of early action for just right, no problem schools, because it's really exciting and uplifting to get that first offer of admission.
That's right.
in December, and really have that in your back pocket. I see students' shoulders drop once they know that they have a place to go. Might not be your first choice. That's fine, but you know that you're going to college.
You're going to college. That's right.
And that's the ultimate goal, to go to college. And in this process. And it's also can be very motivating to get you through the rest of those applications.
That's right.
So if you get take that boost of excitement from a congratulations when you open that email or letter that comes through snail mail, the momentum that you've had creating your applications, that boost can see you through, so you can get done well before regular decision deadlines if you need to submit those applications.
That's right. This is why I love Arizona State, because they're a great university. And if you apply to them, you'll hear back within like 3 weeks. And so I'm telling all my students, just apply to ASU already, please. Like, you're going to get in. It's going to be great. Okay. So let's talk about what to do if you're deferred. I think that the initial thought from students, and more often from parents, is I've got my deferred decision. I need to do something right now. How should students and parents sort of wrestle with that instinct to want to do something immediately?
Right. Take a beat. I understand I really want to go to this school. I have to let them know right now. What can I do? The best thing that you can do is just take a step back and process that decision, what it means. Like we said, reevaluate your list, clear your head. Don't think about it for 24 hours. Give yourself 24 hours just to process the decision before you act. But there is a sense of urgency in terms of when you do want to connect with the admission office. I think it's important to reach out to them because you do want to show your continued interest. So, you might want to make a call to the admission officer who reviewed your application to say, was there anything missing from my application? Is there anything specific that you would like to see in the next, when you reevaluate my application? And most likely the admission officer will say, we really want to see your mid-year grades, because those are going to be that's going to be the factor that I think contributes the most in the reevaluation.
That's right.
And, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that, you can even shoot an email over to them to ask that question. You can also have your counselor reach out on your behalf. And I think that one thing to just keep in mind is what's happening on the other side of the desk right now, which is that I remember reading early decision applications, and it was like a sprint to get those decisions out, and then like a big gasp of getting ready to accept all the mail for the regular decision applications coming in. And so we really, for all those defers that we had, really put them on hold, put them aside for a while. And we were going to come back to them in February and readdress them and look at new materials that had been submitted. But if you sent me a lot of stuff right away, I would probably file that away and forget about it for 3 months. So It's often better to wait multiple months to reach back out. And I think we'll probably have a radio show segment on what to do in that scenario later on.
And I think when it does come time to follow up, you can send an email to express your continued interest, update the admission officer on any new information, whether you got involved in something since you submitted your application, if you had taken standardized tests and you've taken them again, if you've had that opportunity and your scores have gone up and you want to submit those scores.
Yeah.
These are things that can wait, but I would say you want to make sure that you have any new information to the admission committee by mid-February, late February at the latest. Because
I think you're right. And some of the data-oriented stuff, I think you should send it as soon as it becomes available. If you've got test scores, send those in. If you've got new grades, send those in. But I think the sort of the love letter that we talk about, usually is written around Valentine's Day, which is a great way to remember it. And that's where you sort of make your case about the continuing interest that you have in that institution.
Yep.
Any final thoughts that you wanted the listeners to know, knowing that probably we'll have a session on writing that letter a couple of months from now here on the radio show?
I would just say, you've come this far. Get excited for the holidays. You're going to have a break from school.
Yeah.
And take any decision that you get in stride. You're going to land on your feet, and you're going to have options.
That's a great way of putting it. Good place to leave it. And for those of you, we've got listeners out there. If you're watching this on video, you can also compare the color of the walls in my office and Joy's and see whether it's the same color purple or not. So maybe that's a little teaser to go to our Facebook page, find us at College Coach on Facebook, and see whether you can see any differences between these two colors. I really want to stick my hand over into your frame, but I can't seem to do that. All right. When we come back, we'll be talking about scholarships. Joy, thanks for bearing with me and all of my silliness and for helping with the defer. It's great to have you here.
Ian, it's always great to chat with you, and you are my favorite host.
Yes. All right. Folks, don't go away. We'll be right back.